Thank you, Naman. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. So, we have been discussing this very important philosophical system belonging to the Mahayana tradition in Buddhism. And as I mentioned earlier, Nagarjuna is the greatest name in the Madhyamika tradition. And I refer to another very important work apart from Madhyamika Shastram. It's called Madhyamika Karika or Mula Madhyama Shastram. There is another well-known book that Nagarjuna wrote, Vigraha Vyavartani. He wrote quite a good number of books, but the most important ones from a dialectical perspective was Madhyamika Karika, and then that is Madhyama Shastram, and Vigraha Vyavartani means a book, something that removes, dispels all doubts, all wrong perceptions. So if you look at that book, you can see a clear picture of the force of Nagarjuna's argument. And you also get a clear picture of what he must have meant by this term, Shunya. So in the Vigraha Vyavartani, well-known, very celebrated, oft-quoted verse is the 29th one, which addresses a very important problem. Before that, Nagarjuna quotes one verse, Vyavaharam anasitya paramarthona deshide paramartham anasitya nirvanam nadhigamyati. Now, then he says, he addresses a very serious problem that anyone may put before Nagarjuna. If everything is shunya, if everything is without an inherent permanent entity, then what about your own doctrine of nothingness or shunyata? That also will become irrelevant. So we often we refer to this reductio ad absurdum, this unique method of not putting forward your own position, but rather by revealing the contradictions and the logical untenables of the objector's preposition. You don't try to establish anything like your own position, but you appear to agree with the opposite view, and then you threadbare analyze the views of the objector, and then you reveal the inherent indefensible contradictions within their own system. So the opposite view collapses, and you don't have to do anything. Your view automatically becomes the only possible alternative. So this is called the Prasangika method, where Nagarjuna doesn't put forward his own view. He just analyzes, threadbare, the inherent contradictions within the opposite view, and then automatically his view gets self-established. This is Prasangika method. As I mentioned, the reductio ad absurdum. The absurdities, I mean the contradictions. How absurd is the opposite view? The absurdities are revealed. In contrast to this, there is another method that is followed by Bhavya, or Bhavya was a well-known philosopher in Buddhist tradition. So he took an opposite view, and he tried to put forward his own view, which is called Swatantrika school or Madhyamika tradition, in contrast to the Prasangika view of Chandragirti. Chandragirti, the most celebrated commentator on Madhyamika Shastram, he was with most dedicated follower of this Prasangika method. I mean the reductio ad absurdum method. So I'm not equating Chandrakirti's method with this method, so Socrates and others followed. But that's the only way that we can try to make it clear to those who are familiar with Western philosophy. I don't mean to say they are the same or there is no difference at all. There is a difference. Absolutely there is a difference. But then that's the only way for us to make it clear to somebody who may not have studied Buddhist philosophy from a Buddhist bhikshu, or from a place like the University of Benares University, or Dharma, the place where the Tibetan lamas are being taught Buddhist philosophy. So that's the only alternative. So the statement is, Yadi kachana pratikya tatra syad esha me mahadosha bhavet doshaha nasti cha mama pratikya tasma naivasti me doshaha. He says, Yadi cha kachit mama pratikya syad tataha mama pratikya lakshana praptatvat sapurvako doshaha. So an opposite view is projected. If I were to put forward my own view after refuting the opponent's view, then your acquisition, dosha, would have been true. But in this case, I don't have my own pratikya. I am not putting forward my own preposition. I am only trying to reveal the inherent contradictions within your own system without actually putting forward my own position. Therefore, I am not putting forward my own idea. This is a very important point to understand. Nagarjuna says, and of course Chandrakirti, the commentator, says that the Shunyavadins do not have anything to prove, but they just want to disprove or bring out the inherent contradictions of the opponent's view. So this is an important point. That is called the kind of what we call no thesis. Nagarjuna says he has himself no thesis, because he says he doesn't hold any position, any positive thesis or any position to be refuted. If I had a thesis, if you have something to prove, then your view or your acquisition, your assertion that my philosophy suffers from a serious defect. What's a defect? And my philosophy, my thesis is that there is nothing that has got any inherent existence. Everything is shunya. So that will apply to my own philosophy. So this is the dosha, the defect that you are trying to put on my shoulders. But this is not applicable to me, because I don't have any of my own position to prove. I am only emphasizing the defects of the opponent's view. So this is an important point in the Vigraha Vyavartani. It's a very, very well-known statement. Frequently this is quoted to prove, to establish the actual implication of the Prasangika method. Of course, there are other views also. There is another statement in the Vigraha Vyavartani, that is the 9th verse. So you have to remember, those of you who have, I don't know if any of these books have got translations, Vigraha Vyavartani. Yadicha na bhavet subhavo dharmanam nisvabhava ityevam namapi bhavet naivam namapi nirvastukam nasti. Yadi dharmanam subhavo bhavanam subhavanam subhavasya ashunyaga sarvabhavaha, etc. So in this verse, Nagarjuna is addressing the objection that his claim of emptiness or shunyada is itself, it amounts to a position, an assertion, a view. So shunyada is not a view. Shunyada is not the name of a doctrine. Shunyavada is the reality, and the reality need not be or cannot be considered to be a doctrine. Reality is something that we are part of, that we experience. So that also takes Nagarjuna's position close to Advaita. According to Advaita, Advaita is essentially a matter of inner experience. It is not a doctrine. It is not a dogma. It is not even a philosophical tenet, idea, a concept. It is a fact. It is something that we experience when we come out of avidya, ignorance or maya. Similarly, when you realize the truth of the Arya Satyani Four Noble Truths, the truth of dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the way out, and then you practice these eightfold disciplines, and when you attain nirvana, then what you experience is shunya, and it is not a doctrine, it is not a position. So he is not making any preposition, he is not making any pratigna. That's a very important point. He mentioned 29th verse. If I am making a pratigna in the tarka, in Nyayik, pratigna means your own position that you want to prove. Nagarjuna says he has no pratigna, he has no preposition, he has no position to prove. Because it is something that is self-proven. It is self-evident. Just like Atma-jnana, the knowledge of Brahman in Advaita. In Advaita, you don't get knowledge of Brahman. When you remove all wrong notions, what is left out is the reality. It's again not a doctrine, it is a matter of experience. If you look at the whole thing from the perspective of the rope-snake analogy, you can see when you mistake a rope for a snake, then when you bring light, then what happens is the snake idea disappears, and then when it becomes obvious that it is a rope, then you are not discovering a rope, you are not creating a rope, you are not getting a new knowledge. The wrong knowledge has gone, and what is left out cannot even be called a right knowledge, it is a fact of experience. Now, this is a kind of intuitive experience which we cannot really speak of. The philosophical debates and discussions and conflicts arise only when we look at the spiritual reality, a fact of experience, as a doctrine. When you reduce a fact of spiritual experience to the position of a concept or a doctrine, then we can have different views. So that's why Nagarjuna says there is no need for him to prove anything. What is self-evident is the reality. I can give an example in this context, perhaps I think in Carl Jung's concept of intuitive, introspective experience and what do you call intuitive extrovert skills, for example. If you are an extrovert, you can also have a lot of intuitive powers. If you are a football player, if you are a musician, if you are an expert in any area of empirical knowledge, empirical skills, when you develop a skill, a natural trans-empirical power or skill, it goes beyond the average. So there you get an intuition. You can find maybe some gamblers, people who even in the most unspiritual, non-spiritual areas like great military generals like Hannibal. Hannibal is supposed to be the greatest military mind the world has produced. Second Punic War. He was the Carthaginian general and did not have a well-equipped army or well-trained army. He crossed the Alps on the elephant's back and defeat the Romans 4 times. Romans had the best military machine in the 3rd century BC, in the time of Second Punic War. And finally, the great Roman general is called maybe Africanus, Zippo Africanus, who defeated Hannibal, managed to defeat him by always running away from him. So he did not give Hannibal an opportunity to fight him. If he fought, then he would have been crushed. So what he did, he just kept running away from Hannibal. Hannibal had a small army far away from Carthage, no supplies, no logistics, no supply routes. So finally, Zippo Africanus could defeat him because his own people rebelled against Hannibal. So how this man managed to defeat the great Roman military machine, which numerically was far superior to his own rambled, indisciplined recruits. He got all the wild tribes from Spain, other places. Somehow he managed to create a small ramshackle army which managed to defeat and crushed the Romans in 4 important battles: the Battle of Translation, Cannae, Lake Transymia, and so on, but I don't want to go into those details. So this man had a great genius, an intuitive power to defeat the greatest military machine of those times with his own ramshackle, indisciplined army. So you can see a kind of intuitive power at the most extrovert level, you can see. Now the same power in the introvert level, when you journey into your own mind, when you when you try to find out the truth of existence, of human existence, human life, then you realize something and you really cannot explain what you realize. Or you can see that maybe the most visible example that everyone has seen, Ramana Maharshi sitting in loin clothes somewhere looking at something. Now, what he is looking at, we don't know. He is looking at something which he cannot really explain, but can only experience. So this is what Shunya is. That's why Nagarjuna is trying to make it very clear that Shunya is something which is a kind of inner intuitive experience which cannot be explained. But if he told you that, well, it cannot be explained, you may think because he perhaps cannot explain it because he has no ability to explain it. So he uses all possible techniques known to human language during his time to explain to you that the truth of Shunya cannot be explained. He's explaining to you, making clear to you by words the fact that Shunya cannot be explained in words. That's your higher intuition. So this is as true of Shunya as of Brahmajnana. So I was trying to give a brief description of some of the verses from Vigraha Vyavartani. Okay, we may deal with that text much later. It is not as important as Madhyamika Karika, but it is in a way very important because it brings out Nagarjuna's unique dialectical methods. And also, which later Chandrakirti explained through his Prasangya method, means by the method of not establishing your own position and making it clear to your opponent you have nothing to prove, because what you are asserting is a fact of your experience. You don't prove that you have got a head and 2 eyes. You don't prove that. It's so evident. So there is no position. It's not a position that you have a head or you have 2 eyes. So Nagarjuna, he actually uses this language in some other books. Smaller books are there. Anyway, now we are coming to another important verse. In the Madhyamika Karika, there are certain important verses which I want to explain with the help of Chandragirti's commentary, Prasannapada, and after that we will conclude this discussion and we will take up the Yogacara system of Asanga, Vasubandhu and others, Langavadara Sutras and others. So right now we are going to take up a few important verses from the Mula Madhyama Shastra, Mula Madhyamika Karika. I already explained earlier, the first one is, the Mangala Sloka called the verses of dedication. Anirodham, Manutpadam, Manuchedam, Mashashudam, Anegartham, Ananartham, Anagamam, Manirgamam, Yapaditi Samutpadam, Prapanchopashamam Shivam, Deshya Masa Sambuddha Tam Vande Padadam Varam. This is one important verse which he already explained. Just a minute. I will try to remove some of the books that I don't know where I kept the books. Okay, we come to subject now. Okay, now in this verse, he says, these are 8 prepositions are made, like Chaduskoti. That is, this truth is something that never comes into existence. It is, it doesn't arise, it doesn't disappear, and again, it doesn't cease to exist. It is not permanent. Again, it is not manifold. It is not one. It doesn't come, it doesn't go. Yapraditi samutpadam prapancha upashamam shivam. When you realize this, what happens? Prapancha upashamam shivam. In the Mandukya Upanishad, prapancha upashamam shantam shivam chaturtham advayam chaturtham manyante, etc. The word advaya, which is used in Advaita tradition, is also used by Nagarjuna elsewhere. So when you realize this, what happens is, this world that we now believe to be a real thing, that world is now perceived to be something that is unreal. Again, it is not a category called unreal. That is an important point. Nagarjuna makes it clear. Shunya is not a category. Shunya is a matter of experience. Shunya is something that you experience to be a fact. When you realize this Praditya Samutpada. Because Praditya Samutpada is the 12-link chain which is responsible for our clinging to life, past, present and future, birth, life, death and rebirth, and also the whole empirical phenomena. They are unreal. When you realize this, what you feel, what you experience is Shunya. And that is Nirvana according to Madhyamikas. Na sudho napi parato, na dvabhyam napi ahetukaha, utpanna jadu vidyanti bhava kochana kechana. So, he says this, nothing come into existence independently or otherwise. Nor by caused by something, nor being uncaused by something. That's a reality. Tatra jatu idi kadajit ityarthaka kaschana shabda adhara janaka kochi shabda paryayaka, etc. Kechana shabda adheya vajanaka, etc. So, Nagarjuna says that none of these things ever come into existence nor disappear. This again, he establishes this idea again. That is, neither from itself nor from another, neither from growth nor without a cause. None of these entities in the phenomenal world either arise or disappear. That's what he says. I mentioned earlier, it is a kind of intuitive experience which cannot be explained. Of course, one problem is that in modern times, this idea that Shunyatva or Shunyada is a matter of intuitive introvert experience and not a doctrine. That is frequently not emphasized when we learn this as a philosophical doctrine. Because we can only approach these topics from an empirical perspective And from an empirical perspective, even Advaita itself becomes a doctrine, and Shankaracharya takes great pains to assert that Advaita is not a doctrine, Advaita is a matter of experience. Nagarjuna says, Shunyavada is not attained, because Shunya is already there, it's an obvious truth. It is not something that you realize when you transcend the empirical, that is Loka Samvruddhi, Satyam and Paramartha Satyam. When you transcend the Loka Samvruddhi, the Vyavahara, the empirical, then what you experience is transcendental, Shunya. And that itself is not a doctrine, not an entity, but something which cannot be explained. There is another well-known verse that is Asti yadvi subhavena na tad nasti iti shashvatam nasti idanim abhut purvam iti uchcheda prasajyate. That is the, if you have got interest, you can Subhava Pariksha. Maybe it is the 15th chapter of Mula Madhyama Shastram. Subhava Pariksha it is called. So, in other words, it is analysis or examination of its own true nature, its own nature. So, Susyabhava, the inherent true nature, that is being examined or analyzed or discussed. So the idea is this asti yadvi subhavena na tat nasti iti shashvatam. To say that it exists, so if you say something, it exists, implies some degree of permanence. See, according to Madhyamikas, the Shunyavadins, even if you say that something exists at the relative perspective, that itself amounts to a contradiction of Shunya. But in Advaita, Shankaracharya, in a more comprehensive way, he says, this empirical world, what Nagarjuna will call Loka Samvruddhi or the Vyavaharika, the relative, common sense experience, it does have its own reality, empirical, relative. We cannot deny it because we experience it. We are part of it. These mountains and valleys, rivers, and our own body, mind complex, all this part of Praditya Samutpada, according to Shunyavadins, they have no real existence. But then it is mentioned as something to be transcended before attaining Shunya, the Paramartha Satya. But in Advaita, on the other hand, the empirical world has its own level of reality. Only it is not absolutely real, but in Advaita, they assert, they emphasize again and again that it is not absolutely unreal. It is not absolutely unreal. This point is not made very clear in the Shunyavada text. That's an important point to remember. That is what led to the misconception that Shunyavada implies nothingness, as we understand that word in an English dictionary, which it is not. So this is an important point. The major difference between Shunyavada and Advaita is, at some point you can see the totality of all mathematical digits and zero are two perspectives of the same reality. If Nagarjuna calls it Shunya or zero, Advaitins call it all-encompassing entity. The total Purnamada Purnamidam, you can find the Vedic mantra. Everything is Purna, everything is complete. But that Purnam is called Shunya by Nagarjuna. The only problem is in Nagarjuna's system, in Madhyamika system, the actual position of Loka Samvruddhi is not clearly defined, either by Chandrakirti in his Prasangika tradition or Bhavya in his Swatantrika tradition of Madhyama Shastra. Aryadeva, Buddhavalida and others, they followed the Prasangika tradition. And in Bhavya,
called Bhava Viveka, another name, who also expounded Nagarjuna's system. It's called the Swatantriya method. But they establish a position and also contradicts the opponent's position. Unlike Nagarjuna, who doesn't have his own position to establish, he only brings out the inherent contradictions of his opponent's view. So in these arguments, they actually do not clearly draw a line of demarcation between Shunya and Loka Samvrti. But in Advaita, what is Loka Samvrti is Vyavahara, the relative. It has got a validity and reality, but unreality is something that we experience when you transcend it. When you come out of Maya, Avidya, Mithya, Jagat, then you experience something. At that time, you realize this world is Mithya. So the world is Mithya is something that you experience and not actually verbalize or discuss. And this point is clearly emphasized in Advaita. I mean, Anubhavaga Vedya. Atmajnanam is something to be known only through Anubhava, through experience. We can read books, but that experience is beyond books. That kind of definitions are not emphasized in Shunya tradition. For example, in Advaita, it's clearly said, Pancha Shabda Pravritti Nishedha. It's clearly stated that Brahman is something, the transcendental reality, it cannot be explained in terms of 5 possible verbalizations. Either Jadi, Guna, Drivya, Sambandha or Karma. You can explain something in terms of the genetic, the generic category it belongs to, or something, some action related to it, or some properties or qualities, or maybe some kind of categorization. But Brahman cannot be categorized like that. This is implied in Shunya, in Nagarjuna's books, but not clearly emphasized. So that's an important point. That's why it says, Astidi Shashvadagraho, Nastidi Cheda Darshanam. Tasmat Astitva Nastitve Nasiyeda Vichakshanaha. To say that something exists implies some kind of understanding of a permanent entity. That is, Astidi Shashvadagraha. Shashvada means permanent. Graha means grasping, comprehending, catching. So you cannot say Asti. If you say Asti, it exists, it is, it can imply something that really existing all the time, which is opposite of Shunyavada. Then, Nasti iti Uchcheda Darshanam. If you say it does not exist, then also it implies a kind of nihilism, negativism. That also becomes a doctrine. If you deny something, indirectly you are implying its existence, remember. That's an important thing. Suppose you say, I don't have a car. On the one hand, you are saying that you don't have a car. But you are also implying there is a possibility that one day you may have a car, or somebody can have a car. That's the point. So even if you negate something, that negation itself becomes a category. Negation itself implies a possibility, the possible existence of something which you are negating. Negation is negation of something within that time framework, not beyond that. That's why Nagarjuna says, Nasti di Uchcheda Darshanam. If you say it does not exist, then also it implies total negation. That also indirectly implies that it is possible for such a thing to exist somewhere, not right now. Therefore he says, Tasmat astitva nastitve nasriyeda vichakshanaga. Therefore, the philosopher, the wise person, he does not rely upon either nasti or asti, either non-existence or existence. So you cannot say anything. That's why Nagarjuna says, he depends on this doctrine of reductio ad absurdum. He doesn't have his own position to put forward, only he wants to bring out the inherent contradictions of the opponent's view. For those of you who are interested, taking just a few verses, this is from Subhava Pariksha. And then of course there is another, which is a very famous verse is there, that is from Bandha Moksha Pariksha. Means a detailed discussion, analysis or examination of bondage and liberation. That's very similar to the standard views of pre-Shankarite Advaitis like Gaudapada and others, and Yoga Vasishtas and others. So, Nirvana Samaropu na samsarapagashanam yatra kastatra samsaro nirvanam kim vikalpyate. It brings you very close to Advaita actually. What it says is, there is no addition of nirvana and no subtraction of samsara. It means when you practice, when you realize the Four Noble Truths and then you practice these eightfold disciplines, finally after samyak samadhi, you attain nirvana, the eighth discipline. So at that, when you attain nirvana, you are getting liberation. But Nagarjuna says, there is no liberation. Na bandho, na cha sadhaka, na mumukshur, na vai muktaha, ittesha paramartha, the Gaudapada Karika. Na nirodho, na cha utpatti, na bandho, na cha sadhaka, na mumukshur, na vai muktaha, ittesha paramartha. That is pre-Shankarite Advaitic work of Gaudapada's Karika. Here Nagarjuna says there is no distinction, no difference between nirvana, freedom, and bondage. There is no distinction between nirvana and samsara. What does it mean? The samsara also is something that really doesn't exist. Earlier, Nagarjuna will tell you that if samsara is real, it cannot go away. If it is unreal, it doesn't really exist. So where does it exist? So long as we have the desire in our mind, we are clinging to the samsara, life, death and rebirth and this cycle, this wheel of existence, birth, life and rebirth. At that moment you think samsara is there. But samsara is not there when you attain nirvana. And then the point is, if there is no samsara, then what about nirvana? If there is no bondage, what about freedom? If there is no bondage, there can be freedom. So what does it mean? We are inherently free. Freedom is not something that we attained. Bondage is actually unreal. We put ourselves in a position of ignorance, thinking that we are bound, we are in a bondage, so we need freedom. That's again, it's very similar to Advaita. It's something like, again if you take the rope serpent analogy, you bring light, the wrong notion that the rope is a snake, that wrong notion is gone. Now the point is, you don't get anything. Rope was already there. You don't bring rope there. Nor did you drive away the snake. Nothing happened. The rope is an inherent nature. Similarly, the fact that we are the shunya, everything is shunya, it is something that need not be established. Only the wrong notions have to be removed. That is very similar to Advaita. Advaita is very important. You don't attain moksha because there is no real bondage. Bondage is something that we created in our own mind due to delusion, moha, or attachment to body-mind complex. It creates this illusion of bondage. But then we realize it is not an illusion, only when we get out of it. We realize it is Maya only when we are out of it, not before that. When we are within Maya, Maya is not Maya, it's a reality. When we come out of Maya, we understand it is Maya. It is something that is illusion. So Nagarjuna says all these terms are failed attempts to explain that is beyond explanation. It all comes to Advaita. So again, don't ever imagine that this is oversimplification of Vedanta and Buddhism. Not at all. So there are two important perspectives in philosophical systems. The system of the mystics, the system of those who experience, and the systems of the university classroom. The university classroom, there will be no end to conflicts. It can go on for thousands of years. It has been going on for thousands of years. If you go to India, you find Dvaitins and Dvaitins fighting. The battle going on, there are many, many, many years. There are people who fight in the name of the marks on the elephant, where the elephant is marked one drop, other, Sri Vaishnavas, the Sri Vaishnava community, there are temples, and the festivals and elephants. The elephant mark should be one way or other. So it's been going on. So there will be no end to those conflicts because they're at the non-spiritual level. That's why I mentioned earlier, at the intuitive introvert level, all these are experienced as a fact and not as a doctrine. That's an important point to remember. So if you study Advaita properly, then if you read Nagarjuna, you won't see any problem. Nagarjuna says, Anirodham, Anutpadam, Anuchedam, Ashashudam, Anegartham, Ananartham, Anagamam, Anirgamam, same thing. All these you find, non-ceasing, non-arising, non-annihilation, non-permanence, non-identity, non-appearance, non-appearance, non-disappearance, non-disappearance, so to speak. So very difficult words are highly confusing. Why does he use all these words? To tell you that words cannot help you to understand it. You take whatever words you can think of. So if you read these 8 possible prepositions, which beyond double the number of Chaduskodi, you see, you cannot have any other way of thinking. All possible ways of looking at something are exhausted at the very beginning of Mula Madhyama Shastra. And he will look at this. This is all you can use. And they cannot tell you, they cannot explain to you the reality. But if you say, no, you cannot explain the reality, no one will believe. You may think he doesn't know how to speak. So he is using all possible verbalizations to prove that it is beyond verbalization. That's why you already mentioned, Yep praditi samutpadam prapanjo pashamam shivam deshiyamasa sambuddhastam vande vadadam varam. It's an important thing. That is beginning. It's a Mangala Sloka. The words, there is some verses of invocation at the beginning of the Madhyama Shastra. And then there is one, maybe this book you can read, that is that's 25th chapter, that is Nirvana Pariksha, examination or analysis or description of liberation, freedom. Na samsarasya nirvana kinjidasti visheshanam. Na nirvanasya samsarat kinjidasti visheshanam. So that is another important thing. It's very, very, very famous. He says, there is no distinction between samsara and nirvana. So you can imagine. So finally, bondage and freedom are the same. Samsara and nirvana are the same. So, Adaiva samsara nirvanayohu parasparado nasti kaschit visheshaka vicharyamanayohu tulyarubatva. That is Chandrakirti in his commentary Prasannapada. He says, there is no distinction between nirvana and samsara. Again, this is a statement from somebody who has reached experience and not from the standpoint of philosophy. So it's a very important point. In Advaita also, when you are not fully enlightened, you think this person is good, that person is not good, this is ocean, this is mountain, this is tall, this is short, and so on. All these distinctions. Everything is seen through the prism of nama and rupa, name and form. So, empirical level, you may vyavaharika level, common sense experience. But when you reach the intuitive spiritual level of actually experiencing the oneness of everything, oneness of unity and oneness of existence, then you don't look through the prism of nama and rupa, name and form. You transcend name and form. At that time, you don't see anything. Again, you don't look at it, it is an inner experience. Again, it's called the highest intuitive inner experience, which cannot be explained, which can only be experienced. That's it. Atayeva samsara nirvanayoho parasparado nasti kaschit visheshaka. Chandrakirti writes in Prasannapada. Therefore, there is absolutely no distinction between samsara and nirvana. Empirical world, life in this world, the pratitya samutpada framework, the birth, life, death and rebirth, which includes all these components of samsara, vasana, vishaya, the karma chakra, karma, vritti, samskara, chakram, everything is included. All these are samsara. This samsara and nirvana are the same. Only when you reach nirvana, from the highest nirvana. Not before that. Best idea behind. Vicharyamanayoho tulyarupatvad. From the highest perspective, it is same. That's what he says. Chandrakirti. So, this is called avangmanasa gocharam in Advaita. Going beyond mind and words, beyond verbal comprehension, beyond verbalization, beyond empirical comprehension. Shunya otherwise is a matter of inner experience. But that can be grasped only at the transcendental experience level, not at the empirical, philosophical, dialectical level. That's the idea behind. Okay, so I think we have practically finished Madhyamika Shastram. Next time, maybe next class, we will deal with Vigraha Vyavartani, and there are one or two smaller books that we may discuss, and then we will switch on to Yogacara system, which also equally profound, very vast literature. Lankavatara is there, then the works of Dignaga, Vasubandhu and Dharmakirti and others who occupied very important positions in the Nalanda University. Okay, thank you. Now we can have questions. Most welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll lead with a question while I see no hands yet. And my question has to do with the stature of Nagarjuna today as a spiritual philosopher. And you made reference to the academic debates out such things and implications of these analyses compared to the references to the way that mystic thinkers approach the same subject.
Yeah.
And I imagine that the academicians have a different incentive system as they approach the subject, which might explain why they differentiate in ways that don't necessarily capture the mystic elements. Do you think that has affected the stature of Nagarjuna in any substantial way?
Yeah, I will tell you, you'll be surprised. In the Advaitic circles, among the philosophers, not Shankaracharya, but Shankaracharya lived in 8th century. It doesn't directly refer to Nagarjuna. But Nagarjuna philosophy is referred to. Frequently is called Mahavainashika. Literally means the one who destroys everything. And that's because Nagarjuna's philosophy was presented like that by the dialecticians of his time. And he had on innumerable occasions arguments with the Buddhist philosophers, including Yogacara and Shunyavada philosophers. So at the dialectical level, there was the kind of aggressive emphasis on Shunyata to the point of being misunderstood as nihilism. Which obviously Nagarjuna says it's not Shunyata. So the point is, it happens to many philosophical systems. It happens. So that's why I mentioned earlier, when we study philosophical doctrines which have a spiritual background, we have to draw a line of demarcation between those who are spiritually enlightened and those who are different, because they want arguments, discussions, and debates. It's part of academic life, and there is a. I don't say that they are totally without any relevance or importance. They do have their relevance, because vigorous discussion of philosophical ideas is certainly a very good thing in modern world. They do have their own importance and relevance. But also keep in mind that there is something beyond the classrooms or the platforms where we discuss conflicting ideas or different schools of philosophy. There's something that goes beyond that. So that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
David, you're next.
Yeah.
Hello, Swami.
Yeah.
You alluded to my question a little bit there. I guess what I was wondering is Nagarjuna a philosopher, or is he more like Shankara, or Buddha, where he was enlightened and talking about philosophy, trying to describe his own experience in a sense, or was he merely a philosopher?
Yeah, you find among many enlightened spiritual teachers, you find this. On the one hand, they are exponents of a strong philosophical tradition. At the same time, they are not ordinary human beings. They have tremendous spiritual stature, certainly. So maybe, as mentioned earlier, the inner intuitive power, when it grasps something, there are two ways it may express. One is by giving a vigorous interpretation of a spiritual philosophy. But that doesn't diminish their spiritual nature. That's an important point to remember. So, Nagarjuna was certainly an enlightened Buddhist teacher. He was a great philosopher and dialectician. Now the question arises, can you imagine that if Nagarjuna and Shankaracharya and Buddha, they all met together, they've gone to in kind of quarrel. So they lived in different times, and again, they're responding to some of the philosophical discussions going on during their time. Nagarjuna, 3rd, 4th century AD, you can imagine. He had to answer the criticism of Sarvastivadins, Hinayana traditions, and he had his own views, different from the school of Hinayana, called Sarvastivadins, Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, who believed the reality of external objective phenomena, but they are fleeting, anatman, but they do have an entity. They believe that. Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas, two schools of realism in Buddhism. Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. Vaibhashikas believe that things can be directly perceived. Sautrantikas believe that they can only be inferred. So between them there were quarrels. So Nagarjuna had to confront them. So very often, when you find in Vigraha Vyavartani and Mula Madhyama Shastra, uses some very aggressive language he uses. He had in front of him these people who are criticizing Shunyavada, who are trying to, according to him, trying to go away from Buddha's teachings of the momentariness of existence by projecting some kind of reality to external phenomena. So you have to keep in mind in our background, there were two schools, mainstream, two schools of philosophical traditions. One is Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas. They were both realists belonging to Hinayana tradition. Means those who believed in the Pali canonical literature. You find in today's world, you find them in Sri Lanka, Burma and other places. Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas. And they were realists. Then they were idealists. Mahayana system belonging to the Shunyavada and Yogachara system. So there were quarrels between Yogacharas and Shunyavadins. So today, in this 21st century, when we read their books, sometimes we imagine they were fighting among themselves. Maybe not, the way we understand today. So there were huge monasteries, great scholars, great Brahmin scholars converted to Buddhism, brought their own garbage of dialectical, very powerful dialectical skills. A lot of Vedanta also they brought along with them. And they became Buddhist monks. They made a great contribution to the depth and profoundness of Buddhist philosophy. See, Dignaga was a South Indian Brahmin who went to Nalanda and stayed and taught there. So also Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, many of them, from all over India they came. Nagarjuna himself was born in today's Andhra Pradesh. The birthplace is still there. And he went to Nalanda and taught. So, he was a learned man, steeped in Vedic literature. And he brought this Upanishadic philosophy into Vedanta, into Buddhism, you can imagine. That explains the difference between the history of Buddhist thought outside India, especially China and other places, and within India. Zen Buddhism in, let's say, in Japan, for example. It has something to do with the Japanese culture and tradition. I don't think Japan has produced a great man like Shankaracharya or Nagarjuna, but they have produced many wonderful men, practical life, So, meditation, practical life. So, in India on the other hand, people sitting in caves, writing great books, great philosophical ideas, but at the same time they may be living at the banks of Ganga in a small tiny hut, maybe not having anything to eat. People will go and give free food and they write great books, which we read today, which are very now, so they've enriched this spiritual tradition. So this emphasis on self-imposed poverty and austerity, you can find among these great Buddhist monks. So, which may be slightly different from the way it was practiced in places like Japan, Korea and other places. Okay, that's a difference, yeah.
Thank you, Swami. Although we can be grateful, though, for those people who weren't maybe as original, but they kept copies, like in China, some copies.
Exactly, China, yeah, that's true. Huyen Tsang, he came to Nalanda when perhaps Dignaga was teaching there, Dharmapala was there. So, Dignaga came earlier, maybe when Huyen Tsang came, I think Dharmapala was the abbot of Nalanda University. So he took with him a large number of manuscripts, and that's why a lot of these great Buddhist texts were preserved. Muhammad Bhaktiar Khilji, he was a general of Alauddin Khilji, invaded Nalanda University, destroyed the entire university, massacred tens of thousands of students and thousands of teachers. And huge libraries were totally burned. And fortunately, Huyen Tsang had come and taken away large number of manuscripts to China, which are translated into Chinese language, Tibetan language. So if I find many of these manuscripts are preserved in Tibetan and Chinese. Later they brought back to Sanskrit. I made this movement, Bhakti Akilji again moved to Bengal, and there's a beginning of the Islamic rule in Bengal in 13th century. So terrible stories are there. And these Buddhist monks, look at their history. They were so great, so scholarly, so learned. They made great contribution to Ayurveda and Sanskrit grammar. Rupavadara was written, one way of studying the Shabdas and Dhatus, the early stage of learning Sanskrit grammar. Their creation, they wrote magnificent books on Ayurveda and grammar. Outstanding people. They didn't do harm to an insect. They wrote great books, they taught great books, and they lived great lives, and everything practically disappeared. Again, you can see what happened in Alexandria, the same thing. So the same story goes everywhere. So it was a great, glorious period of intellectual activity in India at that time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Zashay, you're next.
Yeah.
My question is on this. You said again, this verse that is connected with Madhya. That is like Pancho Pachama.
Yeah.
Shiva.
Yeah.
The first commented.
Yeah.
Nagarjuna says that.
Yeah.
Is that a direct reference to Madhya? When he said, you would assume that he is specifically invoking Madhya.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good inspiration.
Yeah, Mandukya Upanishad, 7th mantra Mandukya Upanishad. Prapanchopashamam Shantam Shivam Advaitam Chaturtham Manyande Sa Atma Sa Viknyeha. So in the Mandukya mantra you find the Prapanchopashamam is there, Shivam is there. Shiva means auspicious. So here Nagarjuna is saluting Buddha, the enlightened one, the great teacher, the supreme teacher, who taught this Praditya Samutpada, dependent origination, which tells you that everything in this world is conditioned. Nothing has any inherent eternal existence. So the one who taught this great truth, and also the truth of the peaceful cessation of the worldly sensations, the conceptual proliferation. And to him I pay my tributes. I salute the great Buddha. There's a literal meaning. So you can very well say that Nagarjuna must have taken this idea, Prapancho Pashamam. It is directly from Mandukya Upanishad 7th mantra. Shivam also. There are other places where Nagarjuna uses the word, the Shunya is Advaita. Advayam, the word is used by Nagarjuna. So how can you use the word Advayam to qualify something which is understood as nothingness? No. So that's why again Shunya is no nothingness. That's the most obvious truth that comes out of a direct acquaintance with the writings of Nagarjuna. And Chandrakirti's commentary, Prasannapada. Of course, on this point, both the Swatantrikas, Bhavya, and Prasangikas of Chandrakirti, two different schools of interpreting Mula Madhyama Shastra. They agree with regard to the fact that Shunya obviously is not what we understand by the English word nothingness or emptiness. That's what it is.
Thank you, Shay.
So, just one more follow-up question. You know, also in this verse, but there's like, there's like this refrain, it's like, like, it's sort of, it would be the idea of like, there is a description of something to be known. Something like Atman is something to be known. Maybe it is to be known through experience, but this does also feel like a difference from Shunyavada, that this Atman that you should need to know is different from this Shunyavada or Shunyata, which is only, as you said at the beginning, he's only saying there's all these things that you should
It's
not
not clear,
know.
not clearly audible, not clearly audible. So I don't know if there is some problem with the mic system at your end. I do not know. You can just examine. It's not clear.
Let me rejoin and I'll ask.
Bobby, it's clear to you?
No, it wasn't quite clear, and I was muted.
But when you speak, it's clear. When Bobby, you speak, it's clear.
Okay, Shay is going to
Yeah.
exit and rejoin,
Yeah.
and we're going to go on for the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
So there've been I apologize for these disruptions on
Yeah.
on the audio.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Vaidehi, and then I'll have a question on the YouTube that I will ask for that questioner. So Vaidehi, you're unmuted now, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Pranam Sanji.
Yeah, namaste.
So I'm just trying to get some clarification. Is it true that both the Sunyavadas and the Advaitins, that in the world which we live in, before we transcend to that experience, they both see that world as impermanent? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is like Nietzsche or a nihilist. Do they see? I haven't studied Nietzsche very in depth, but is their claim of nihilism just that everything's temporary? They just see the world as temporary?
You said Nietzsche, but you said
Nihilism.
Oh,
like
nice, yeah.
Nietzsche,
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it just because they see the world like he sees everything's temporary and not permanent, so everything's like
Yeah, I think Western philosophers, there are many Western philosophers who come very close to Indian philosophical systems, especially Shunyavada or Buddhism and so on, that's true. So very often there are many unanswered questions when you read their books. That's because in Western philosophy, some of these this vocabulary doesn't exist. That's an important thing. You see, somebody like Kant may talk about thing in itself, or some Western, Eckhart can talk about some supreme Godhead beyond the Trinity, beyond what we normally call anthropological conception of God, So they are indicating something, but there is this problem. They don't have the vocabulary to clearly categorize these ideas. That creates problems. That's an important point. So if you understand this, and then you read their books, they are coming very close to, or somewhere, to some extent, close to Buddhist philosophy. This world that we find itself, as such, it is not real in the sense that we normally consider as real. Something when you see a tree in front of you, you don't say, if somebody tells you it is unreal, from a very empirical point of view, it is totally crazy. But then, if you think little, from a distance you pause for a minute and think, There's a great truth in that. Now, how to explain this? For that you need a vocabulary. That vocabulary can exist only if there's a lineage in one specific tradition. So, let's say for example from Meister Eckhart, 13th century AD to our own times. Eckhart could not start a lineage where he taught his ideas, which again were further developed and interpreted by a number of philosophers like him. It didn't happen. So there are scattered ideas where directly or indirectly they are knocking at the doors of different schools of Indian philosophy, including Buddhism. But if you say it is like this, many academics won't agree. That's a problem. So if you read Western philosophers, you find many of them under the influence of Buddhism, Shunyavada, Yogacara system, talking about consciousness. They get all this from Yogacara system. But again, they are trying to create their own parallel, alternate world of ideas, which become very confusing. Maybe very charming for a platform to talk about. I think one great exception in 19th century, 20th century was Carl Jung, who was a thinker and also a psychologist. Yeah, his idea of consciousness, for example. He seems to grasp the essence of consciousness, Yogacara, the Yogacara concept of consciousness. Today, a lot of discussions going on consciousness are somehow linked to the Yogacara system, Vijnanavada. But again, this lack of vocabulary, clearly defined vocabulary. Very often the alternate, the equivalents that you find in Western psychology may not be adequate to clearly imply what Sanskrit philosophers meant by the word Vijnana, Ale Vijnana, or Sodra, Pravritti Vijnana, all those terms. They can find it in yoga. When we discuss Yogacara system, we'll explain this. That's the problem. So to say, is it true the same thing which somebody said, if I say yes, it may appear to be oversimplification. It may not be always correct. We won't be doing justice to either of them. That's an important point. But if from a spiritual perspective, you can see a connecting link. But if you say academically, people may not agree. Even this, what I said just now, the similarity between Nagarjuna's Shunya and Shankaracharya's Brahman, Indian writers also don't agree, may not fully agree. There are some, but there are many who do not. Because that way of looking at it from a higher perspective, it's called intuitive perspective, which in a way you find in your Carl Jung, he also talks about intuitive, introverts and all that. You find. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vaidehi. I'm going to, on the subject of the vocabulary and the cross-referencing, there's a very interesting question from the YouTube, and then we'll circle back to Shay, who hopefully will be audible. The question from YouTube, did Nagarjuna believe in Ishvara?
Ishvara.
And does Sunya suggest you don't need that?
No, Nagarjuna did not believe in Ishvara. The very concept doesn't occur in Nagarjuna's system. It is as the God as we understand among the theistic philosophers, or devotional schools of philosophers, or even what we call one school of yoga system, which accepts some kind of Ishvara idea. It never occurs in Nagarjuna's system. Absolutely no. But then you find, if you read books on Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana, different schools of Mahayana Buddhism, you find so many deities, so many anthropomorphic ideas, concepts of God, gods and goddesses, both you find in Buddhism. So where do they come from? I think they must have come from different tantric schools which are maybe influenced by Buddhism. I can't even imagine a Buddha talking about Mula Manjusri and all you don't find. You can see Manjusri Sankalpa, divine feminine archetype, and different gods and goddesses. Some of them are not very pleasant looking even. You don't want to go anywhere near them if you look at the pictures. So all these ideas developed later on. We don't know how they developed in Tibet and other places. Maybe due to different schools of Tantra which influenced Buddhism. You read, if you want to know Buddha, you read Dhammapada. Very straight cut book, very simple book in Pali, and very similar to Gita. All about some higher values. That's what Buddha was talking about. So then Buddhism is full of different deities, gods and goddesses. I don't say mean some superhuman entities, both feminine and masculine.
Thank you, Maharaj. I hope I did justice to the spirit of the question from YouTube, and if not, please post a clarification. Hopefully that answers the question. And let's circle back to Shay now, and hopefully that's audible.
How is the sound?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I'm sorry for before. So, my second question about Mandukya Upanishad and the comparison with Nagarjuna is when I read Mandukya Upanishad, right, there is a sense of maybe rejecting a type of unreality, but also that there is an entity to be known. Atma is to be known. Like there's this refrain, Ya evam Veda, in some of the verses. So there is something to be known. And you said at the beginning that Nagarjuna, he tried to say, I'm only disproving other philosophies. I'm not even affirming a philosophy of my own.
Yeah.
So is this maybe a point, there's so many similarities with the Advaita, but maybe this is a place of dissimilarity, that there is an entity to be known in Vedanta.
Yeah.
And even though that's a philosophical difference, it's on a philosophical level, but maybe that is a difference.
Yeah. So, the seventh mantra, Sa Atma Sa Vijñeyeha, in the seventh mantra. So, Shantam Shivam Jadurtham Maninde Sa Atma Sa Vijñeyeha. So, that Atman is to be known. Now, Nagarjuna also talks about the need for effort for nirvana and so on. But then, if Nagarjuna had ever said that there is something to be known, the supreme reality, something to be known, that will be opposite to, that will be directly contradictory to the basic tenets of Buddhism. So Buddhism doesn't accept any permanent entity as such. Okay, so Nagarjuna doesn't say that. But I mentioned Nagarjuna was a highly educated Sanskritist, familiar with the Upanishad, Vedanta, Vedic literature. So, and a great saint. So naturally, in his writings you can find the influence of a person who has studied Vedanta and not Vedanta philosophy, I said, because Vedanta philosophy as we know today existed only thanks to Shankaracharya. He was the one who could develop everything to combat system of philosophy. But Vedas included Upanishads also. And Upanishads contain a lot of ideas, one supreme reality. So Nagarjuna took that, but then he called it zero. Complete, all encompassing, 1 0. That's the thing. As I mentioned, if you can think of the biggest and largest possible arithmetic figure, which again infinity, there is no end to that, the infinity also is 0. From one angle you call it 0, from another angle you call it infinity. But Advaita is called infinity. Infinite is one of the terms used in Advaita. Nagarjuna called it Shunya. And he also used the word Shunya is Paramartha Satta, supreme reality, he says. Shunya is Paramartha Satta. So, Dve satye samupasitya buddhanam dharmadeshana loka sambuddhi satyam cha paramarthadaha. He says Buddha's teachings are twofold. Two categories of truth. One is loka sambuddhi, the empirical, the conventional truth of our normal empirical experience. Loka sambuddhi. It's called vyavaharika in Advaita. And paramartha, supreme. And the supreme truth is Shunya. So do you think the Shunya is different from Brahman? No. I think the problem is only with the translation of the word Shunya. And that problem began long ago, maybe very soon after Nagarjuna's passing away.
Maharaj, it seems clear that you've been motivated with great zeal to correct that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very important. No, otherwise. You can ask one question. Buddha walked 1300 miles from Lumbini in Nepal to Bodh Gaya and sat there under a tree with a strong resolution to get enlightenment. He got enlightened, went to Saranath and started his sermons. He wanted to teach everything is Shunya, everything is zero, everything is nothing. Do you think that is what he had to teach? But he, in the Lalita Vistara, in the conventional Buddhist biographies, Buddha is depicted as embodiment of enlightenment. So do you think when you realize everything is Shunya, you get enlightened? So what Nagarjuna calls Shunya is nothing but Buddha's enlightenment. And that enlightenment can be called emptiness. Okay? So thank you for these wonderful discussions. Thank you so much. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishnaarpanamastu.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the questioners.
Thank you. Everyone asked the question. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining from New York.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's very late. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
convinced, by the way, of
Thank
the
you.
truth of what you said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.